In the spring of 2022, whispers began circulating around Palm Bay Women's Correctional Facility, a medium-security prison tucked away in the swamps of northern Florida. The kind of place the world forgets about, until something happens that it simply can't ignore. It started with a single medical report. An inmate, 24-year-old Jasmine Lee, was taken to the infirmary for what she thought was a stomach bug. She was sluggish, throwing up in the mornings. But the test came back with something she never expected. She was 8 weeks pregnant. That might sound routine, until you realize Jasmine had been in administrative segregation for over a year. No contact visits. No male staff allowed in her cell without supervision. No way, medically or logistically, for a pregnancy to occur, unless someone broke the rules. Or broke her. At first, prison officials said it must have been a mistake. Maybe she got pregnant before her last intake, and no one caught it. Maybe her hormone levels were off. Maybe she was lying. But then came the second, then the third. By mid-June, 5 different inmates, all in restricted housing, all under lockdown protocols, had tested positive for pregnancy. And all 5 told the same story. They had no idea how it happened. The Department of Corrections was quick to downplay it. A spokesperson gave a rehearsed statement to local news. "We are conducting internal reviews. At this time, there is no evidence of misconduct by staff or breaches of protocol." But behind those prison walls, the women knew something was wrong. And one of them, Shayla Banks, wasn't going to let it go. Shayla wasn't like the others. She was quiet, observant, with a sharp mind and a stubborn sense of justice. At just 27 years old, she had already lived a dozen lives. Once a nursing student at Miami-Dade College, she fell into the world of prescription fraud and addiction after losing her mother. She pled guilty to trafficking oxycodone and received a 12-year sentence. But prison hadn't broken her. It had refined her. And when she found out she was pregnant, without memory of how or why, Shayla knew she was either losing her mind or someone had violated her in the most intimate, horrifying way. She started watching, listening, keeping notes. Inmates whispered about waking up sore, about missing underwear, about strange dreams and foggy nights. Most of them were too afraid to say anything, afraid they'd be sent to solitary, or worse, silenced. But Shayla had already lost too much to fear, and she had something the others didn't, a plan. Over the next few weeks, Shayla began documenting everything. Names of staff who entered her unit, night shifts and who was on them, food trays and how they tasted, how she felt the morning after each shift. She even began pretending to pray in her cell, just so she could hide something inside her Bible, a piece of evidence, something no one knew she had. And in late July, she wrote a letter. It was addressed to Monica Hayes, a civil rights attorney who had once visited the prison to speak about inmate abuse. Shayla had remembered her, trusted her. The letter was detailed, urgent, and ended with a single chilling sentence. "If something happens to me before this reaches you, please know this wasn't an accident." She slipped the envelope into the outgoing legal mail pile. It was supposed to be protected, unopened by staff. But in a place like Palm Bay, rules were flexible, and someone must have known she was getting too close to the truth. On August 4th, 2022, at 3:18 a.m., the hallway camera outside Shayla's unit went dark. The footage cut out for exactly 47 minutes. At 4:12 a.m., a correctional officer named Marcus Dawson radioed for assistance. He claimed to have found inmate Shayla Banks hanging in her cell, an apparent suicide. The official report listed it as self-inflicted. But no one, not the other women, not Shayla's family, not even the warden's own secretary, believed that for a second, because Shayla was about to expose the truth. And now she was dead. But what no one knew yet was that her final act would be the one that brought everything crashing down. Before the jumpsuit, before the cell, before the night her life was stolen behind a locked steel door, Shayla Banks was just a girl with a backpack full of textbooks and a dream that didn't quite fit the world she came from. Born and raised in Liberty City, one of Miami's most overlooked neighborhoods, Shayla knew hardship before she ever knew hope. Her mother, a single parent battling lupus, worked double shifts as a home health aide. Her father? just a name on an old birth certificate. But Shayla had a gift. She was sharp, curious, hungry to understand how the human body worked. By the time she was 16, she was tutoring classmates in anatomy and volunteering at a free clinic on weekends. Teachers whispered that she had a shot at med school, a ticket out. She enrolled at Miami-Dade College with a full academic grant, majored in pre-nursing, kept her head down and her grades up. Then came the diagnosis. Her mother's condition worsened fast. The prescriptions stacked up. Insurance fell short. Shayla watched her mother cry as she chose between insulin and electricity. And one day, when a desperate, soft-spoken pharmacist quietly offered her oxycodone samples off the books in exchange for a favor, she didn't say no. It started small. A refill here, a forged signature there. By the time she was 24, Shayla was running pills across county lines. Not for riches, not even for herself, just to keep the lights on, to keep her mother breathing. There was a night Shayla never forgot. She was 17, curled up on the worn-out couch in their Liberty City apartment, watching her mother fight to stay awake between waves of pain. The power had been cut again, and the only light came from a half-melted candle in a jelly jar. Her mother, June, had just returned from a grueling shift, her body aching, joints swollen, face pale with exhaustion. Yet, she still managed to smile as she reached out to touch Shayla's hand. "You ever think about giving up?" Shayla had whispered that night, her voice barely audible over the hum of the city outside. Her mother didn't answer right away. She looked down at the swelling in her fingers, then up at her daughter's worried face. "I think about you," she finally said, "and that makes giving up impossible." Then she pulled Shayla close and added something she'd only say once in her life. "Don't ever let this world silence you, Shay. You got a voice. A smart one. A strong one. Use it, even when it's shaking." That memory would come back to Shayla years later, as she sat in her prison cell with a growing fear inside her. She would hear her mother's voice in the rustle of pages, feel her warmth in the silence between lockdown checks. When Shayla first suspected something was terribly wrong, that she was pregnant but couldn't remember how, it wasn't just rage or confusion that flooded her. It was grief. Grief for a mother who had suffered and died too soon. Grief for a life that had once been filled with textbooks, ambition, and late-night whispered dreams about becoming a nurse. Grief that, even in this place built to strip her of everything, the one voice she needed most was now just an echo. But that echo was enough. It reminded her who she was, and why she couldn't let this go. But the DEA doesn't care about motives. The raid was quiet, clinical. They had the texts, the camera footage, the marked bills. Her plea deal was fast-tracked. 12 years. No parole for 7. And just like that, the girl with the brightest future became Florida State inmate number 432979. Prison was cruel. It was cold and loud and full of women who'd long since given up. But Shayla refused to let herself rot. At Palm Bay, she signed up for every program they'd allow: GED tutoring, mental health workshops, CPR certification. She spent her days working in the prison infirmary as an assistant, helping older inmates check vitals or clean wounds. The nurses liked her. Even some of the guards respected her. But she kept her distance, because respect inside those walls was just another currency, and it came with a price. Her cellmate for a time, a woman named Keisha Durant, once told her, "You're too soft to make it here, girl, but you got fire in your eyes. You just don't know how to use it yet." It wasn't until the pregnancy that Shayla understood what Keisha meant. At first, she thought she was losing it. The nausea, the fatigue, the weight gain. She hadn't had contact with anyone, not even a doctor in months. But the test was clear. She was pregnant. When the nurse told her, Shayla just sat there, silent. Her hands clenched so tight her fingernails left crescent-shaped cuts in her palms. How? There was no answer, no comfort, no explanation, just shame and a growing pit of fear. That night, she couldn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling for hours, her mind running in 1,000 different directions, until a memory came back, not a clear one, but a flash. A man's silhouette, a strange humming sound, the taste of metal in her mouth, a moment of pressure, then nothing. The next day, Shayla made a decision. She wasn't going to cry. She wasn't going to beg. She was going to find out the truth, even if it killed her. She began with the schedule board. Who had been on duty during the last 2 months? Which COs had late-night rounds? She made mental notes of who brought the food trays, who lingered too long at the door, who never made eye contact. And she noticed him. Marcus Dawson. Always calm. Always polite. Too polite. He volunteered for night shifts. Always worked alone in the medical wing. He looked at her like he knew a secret she didn't. That week, Shayla started preparing. She feigned illness to get access to the infirmary, swiped a small vial used for sample storage, and took it back to her cell. She waited until she noticed something strange on her bedsheet one morning, barely visible, almost nothing. She used a cotton swab to collect it, labeled the vial, tucked it inside the hollowed-out spine of her prison-issued Bible. Then, she wrote the letter. Dear Ms. Monica Hayes, you came here once to talk about rights. I don't know if I have any left, but I think you're the only person who might believe me. 5 of us are pregnant. None of us should be. We don't remember anything, not clearly. But I know I didn't consent. I know someone is doing this to us. His name is Marcus Dawson. I don't have much time. I've collected something that might prove it. It's hidden in my Bible. Please, if you get this, don't let this die with me. Shayla Banks. The letter was dropped into the outgoing legal mail that Friday. Shayla felt lighter that day. Hopeful even. She smiled at the nurse, helped a new inmate fold her laundry, sat in the yard for the first time in weeks. No one knew it would be her last full day alive. Inside the cold, gray walls of Palm Bay Women's Correctional Facility, truth was a dangerous thing. It could cost you privileges, or your freedom, or, in Shayla Banks's case, it could cost you your life. But once she dropped that letter into the legal mail bin, Shayla knew there was no turning back. She had lit the match. Now she needed to survive long enough to watch it burn. The hardest part of her investigation wasn't gathering evidence. It was pretending nothing had changed. Every day, she had to play the same role she always had. Calm, quiet, helpful. She couldn't show fear. Couldn't show suspicion. Eyes were everywhere. She didn't know who was involved or who was watching. So she stayed steady. She cleaned floors. She took vitals in the infirmary. She helped in the prison library, where she could flip through old policy manuals looking for flaws in the security protocols. And all the while, she kept building her mental file on Marcus Dawson. Marcus was no rookie. He'd been at Palm Bay for 6 years. Former Marine, decorated in his early service. Had a spotless record with the Department of Corrections. Charming, well-spoken, never raised his voice. He knew how to blend in. But Shayla saw the cracks. The way he lingered outside cell block F longer than anyone else. The way he checked in on certain inmates late at night, offering them snacks or Tylenol from his pocket, not from the med station. And most of all, the way he looked at her, like he knew she remembered something, like he was waiting for her to crack. She didn't. Instead, she started logging everything. On scraps of toilet paper, on the backs of puzzle book pages, hidden beneath layers of soap labels. She noted the dates and times he entered her block, the names of the pregnant inmates he visited, when the cameras malfunctioned, always during his shift, who delivered meals, when she felt dizzy or disoriented. She even faked a seizure once, just to get access to the infirmary camera logs, which she learned were stored separately from the main block. She didn't get a copy, but she saw the timestamps, and every single one of them matched his rounds. Meanwhile, whispers were starting to spread. Other inmates, one Shayla trusted, began coming to her in secret. Something happened to me too, one said, shaking. I thought I was dreaming, but I woke up bleeding, said another. He told me I'd never be believed, whispered a third. None of them had gone to the warden. They were terrified. Some were undocumented immigrants, afraid of deportation. Others were older, long-timers who'd learned to stay silent to stay alive. But Shayla didn't have that option anymore. She was pregnant, and she knew who did it. One night, she was woken by a strange sound. A low buzzing, mechanical. The hallway lights flickered. She sat up in bed, eyes wide. Then she saw the shadow. Someone stood outside her cell door. Just standing, watching. No movement, no flashlight. Just the silhouette of a man in uniform. Her heart pounded. Was he testing her? or warning her. She backed into the corner of her cell, clutching her Bible like it could shield her. After a few moments, the shadow vanished. The next morning, her breakfast tray was missing. Later that week, she tried to send a second letter. This one included her makeshift log of evidence, carefully rewritten on tissue paper and folded into a prayer card. But when she handed it off to the guard assigned to legal mail, he glanced at the envelope, then smirked. "Didn't know you were such a writer, Banks." Shayla's stomach dropped. That envelope never reached Monica Hayes. She knew it before dinner. By now, she could feel the walls closing in. She had gathered enough information to know Marcus wasn't acting alone. There was at least one other guard helping him. Maybe two. Possibly someone in the medical team who helped cover up sedation or tampered with test results. But she was running out of time. Her body was changing. Her belly was starting to show. And soon, she feared he would come again. So she made one final move. She confided in Danielle Rivers, a young nurse with kind eyes and trembling hands. Danielle had been avoiding Shayla ever since the first pregnancy report, but Shayla cornered her during a hallway cleanup shift. "You know what's happening," Shayla said, voice low. "He's not going to stop until someone makes him." Danielle was frozen. "If you say anything," she whispered, "he'll kill me." Shayla placed a small note in her palm. "Then let me be the one he kills. Just make sure someone finds this." It was a copy of her log, a second sample hidden in a tiny film canister, and a message. "If I don't wake up tomorrow, tell them I didn't do this to myself." Later that day, as Shayla was returning from the infirmary, she turned the corner near cell block B, and there he was. Marcus Dawson, standing in the corridor like he'd been waiting for her. They locked eyes. She didn't flinch. "You've been busy," he said, voice smooth, almost amused. "Asking questions, writing letters, making friends with the wrong people." Shayla's jaw tightened. "You don't scare me." He stepped closer, just enough to lower his voice. "You should be scared, Banks. You're in a place where no one hears you scream. You know that better than most." For a split second, silence stretched between them, thick with heat and unspoken violence. Then Shayla spoke evenly. "I remember more than you think." Marcus's smile faltered. "You think you've got something? A note? A vial? You think that'll matter once you're gone? I think the truth has a way of surviving, even when people don't." He leaned in, eyes cold. "You're clever. I'll give you that. But clever girls don't last long in here. They trip. They fall. They hang themselves with their own blankets." For the first time, Shayla saw it, the mask slipping, the predator underneath, the desperation behind the arrogance. She leaned closer, so only he could hear. "Then I hope you brought a good pen, Officer Dawson, because when they find me, they're going to need your signature at the bottom of the cover-up." His hand twitched at his side, but he didn't move, didn't threaten her again, didn't need to, because they both knew the game was almost over. She walked past him, slow and deliberate, her fingers curled tightly around her Bible. He didn't follow, but she felt his eyes on her all the way down the corridor, like the closing grip of a noose that hadn't tightened yet, but would. On August 3rd, Shayla took a longer shower than usual. She folded her linens neatly. She read Psalm 91 aloud 3 times. Then she sat by the cell window and watched the sun disappear behind the walls of concrete and steel. That night, no one saw her again alive. And in the morning, the prison said she had taken her own life. But deep in a drawer at the infirmary, hidden behind a box of latex gloves, Danielle kept her promise. She didn't say a word. Not yet. But the time would come when she'd open that drawer and ignite the storm Shayla started. Danielle had only been at Palm Bay for 11 months. Fresh out of nursing school, she'd taken the job because no hospital was hiring full-time and she needed to pay off her student loans. It was supposed to be temporary, just a stopgap. But Palm Bay was a place where temporary turned permanent without you noticing. She remembered the first time she saw Marcus Dawson. He seemed like the kind of man you could trust. Polite, calm, the type who smiled when no one else did. In those early weeks, he even helped her carry supplies to the infirmary. Joked about how she needed to get used to the rhythm of the place. Back then, she thought he was kind. Then things started to feel off. A pregnant inmate here. A missing report there. Marcus seemed to know too much. about injuries that hadn't been reported, medications that hadn't been logged. He made casual remarks that shouldn't have meant anything, but left her uneasy. And then came Shayla. Danielle remembered the moment Shayla first looked her in the eye and asked, "Do you ever wonder what happens here at night?" She wanted to pretend she hadn't heard. She had spent months trying not to see what she saw, to tell herself she wasn't part of the problem as long as she didn't participate. But the truth was simpler and uglier. She was afraid. Afraid of what would happen if she stepped out of line. Afraid of the subtle warnings, like how her lunch got accidentally thrown away the day after she asked about a medication log. Afraid of the time Marcus stared at her a little too long and said, "You know how hard it is to find good nurses in here, right?" So she did what people in powerless systems often do. She survived. She kept her head down, smiled when spoken to, signed forms she didn't want to read, and hoped someone braver would fix it all. But then Shayla pressed that note into her hand. And for the first time in months, Danielle felt something more powerful than fear or shame. Because someone was trusting her, and that trust came with weight. As she sat in the infirmary that night, the storm building outside, she pulled the drawer open, not because she was ready, but because she was done pretending. She stared at the canister, the folded log, the trembling truth packed into desperate pieces. And she whispered, more to herself than anyone else, "I should have helped her sooner." The storm rolled in around midnight. Thick clouds blanketed the moon, and a warm, electric hush settled over Palm Bay Correctional Facility like something out of a Southern Gothic nightmare. Rain tapped lightly on the concrete walls at first, then turned violent, rattling the narrow cell windows like a warning no one could hear. It was August 4th, 2022, the last night of Shayla Banks's life. Inside cell B17, she sat motionless on the edge of her cot, her back straight, hands folded in her lap. Her Bible, her hiding place, her shield, her voice, rested beside her. She had tucked everything inside it, just in case, but a part of her already knew. He was coming. Down the corridor, the security cameras flickered. At exactly 3:18 a.m., the feed went dark. Not all of them, just the two mounted over cell block B, Shayla's unit. The glitch lasted 47 minutes. According to the official log, Officer Marcus Dawson was on his final round of the night. He checked in on 6 cells before stopping at Shayla's. What happened during that time wasn't recorded, but the aftermath was. At 4:12 a.m., Dawson's voice crackled over the radio. "Control, this is Unit 4. I got a code blue. Inmate Banks is unresponsive in her cell. Possible suicide. Request medical assistance." The report that followed was chilling in its simplicity. The kind you write when you've written too many of them. Inmate found hanging by bedsheet from upper bunk. No signs of struggle. Cell locked. Suicide note not recovered. Inmate pronounced dead at 4:31 a.m. It was clean. Clinical. Too clean. When Nurse Danielle Rivers arrived with the crash cart, she already knew what she'd see. But the moment she stepped inside cell B17, she stopped cold. Shayla wasn't suspended. Her body was lying on the ground, the bedsheet loosely wrapped around her neck. No bruising, no rope burns, no indication of force strong enough to crush a windpipe. Danielle swallowed hard. Her hands trembled, but she played her part. Checked the pulse. Called the time. Signed a form. It wasn't the time to speak. Not yet. But she took photos, quick, shaky shots with a hidden burner phone taped behind her clipboard. The marks on Shayla's neck looked wrong. Not vertical compression, but finger-shaped bruises. As if someone had strangled her with their hands first, then staged the rest. By sunrise, word had spread through the prison like wildfire. Some of the inmates wept. Others sat stone-faced in stunned silence. A few whispered things no one had the courage to say out loud. They killed her. She knew too much. She was trying to protect us. Even the warden's assistant, a middle-aged woman named Karen Miller, paused outside the file room that morning, staring blankly at Shayla's intake photo on the wall. A faint whisper escaped her lips. This girl wasn't crazy. Outside the prison, things were moving faster than anyone expected. Because what Marcus Dawson didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that the first letter Shayla wrote to attorney Monica Hayes had made it through. It had arrived 3 days prior. and Monica, a seasoned civil rights lawyer with a long history of battling the Florida Department of Corrections, had already filed a preliminary injunction to investigate the pregnancies at Palm Bay. The moment she received word of Shayla's death, she drove straight to the state capitol, demanding emergency intervention. And she brought the letter with her. If something happens to me before this reaches you, please know this wasn't an accident. It was no longer a whisper. It was a bombshell. That afternoon, the Department of Corrections released a statement. We are deeply saddened by the loss of inmate Shayla Banks. An internal investigation has been opened to review all circumstances surrounding her death. Any suggestion of misconduct will be taken seriously. But the tone was nervous, forced, because Shayla's story had just made the evening news. Local stations ran headlines like, Red Circle, mysterious pregnancies at women's prison raise alarming questions. Red Circle, inmate found dead days after alleging rape by correctional officer. And inside Palm Bay, Marcus Dawson was starting to sweat. That night, he cornered Danielle Rivers outside the infirmary. I know you've been talking, he whispered, eyes wild. They're not going to believe some little nurse over a decorated officer. Keep your mouth shut if you want to keep that license. Danielle didn't answer. But when she got back to her quarters, she pulled out the photos from Shayla's cell. She copied her medical logs. She retrieved the film canister hidden behind the gloves. And she made a call. The next morning, Monica Hayes walked through the prison gates with a subpoena in hand and 2 federal investigators behind her. She didn't smile. She didn't shake hands. She just looked up at the main tower and whispered, This place is about to collapse. Shayla Banks never got to see justice. But in death, she did what she couldn't do in life. She forced the world to look. And soon, the truth about what happened behind those walls would spill out like blood from a fresh wound. The storm outside had passed, but inside Palm Bay Women's Correctional Facility, a bigger one was just beginning. Within 48 hours of Shayla Banks' death, a federal agent from the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division arrived with subpoenas, cameras, and full authority to tear the place apart from the inside out. Leading the legal charge was attorney Monica Hayes, armed with Shayla's original letter, copies of her handwritten logs, and a film canister containing DNA evidence retrieved by nurse Danielle Rivers. What was once a suspicious suicide had now become a federal investigation into sexual assault, murder, and conspiracy within a state-run prison. And at the center of it all, correctional officer Marcus Dawson. Monica started with the basics. She sat with the 5 pregnant inmates, one by one, in separate rooms, making sure they felt safe, heard, and free to speak without retaliation. What she heard was chilling. Inmate Jasmine Lee recalled waking up without underwear and a weird soreness she thought came from cramps. Inmate Carla Denon said she had recurring nightmares of someone holding her down, but thought they were trauma flashbacks. Another woman, too afraid to give her name on record, said Marcus used to bring her hot cocoa at night. The next morning, she always woke up groggy and confused. They all described missing time, headaches, vague flashes. None of them remembered consenting to anything, and all 5 had been impregnated within a 3-month window during Marcus's night shifts. Meanwhile, federal forensic technicians went to work. They recovered camera logs from the malfunctioned hallway unit outside Shayla's cell, manual overrides in the surveillance system showing someone had cut the feed remotely, using a guard access terminal, traces of benzodiazepines in unopened food packets for Marcus's shift, a partial match of Marcus's DNA on the cloth sample Shayla had hidden in her Bible. Then came the final blow. One of the officers, under pressure from mounting evidence, broke. Officer Leonard Pierce, a quiet, older guard with 17 years in the system, confessed that Marcus had bragged about getting close to certain inmates. He said Marcus called it therapy, a twisted justification. And Pierce, he didn't report it because you don't make enemies in this place. That statement alone was enough to trigger multiple arrests and immediate suspensions within the facility. Marcus Dawson was detained on August 9th, 5 days after Shayla's death. He didn't go quietly. When they entered his home with a warrant, they found his uniform bag with soiled undergarments belonging to female inmates, a burner phone containing photos of sleeping women in prison beds, clearly taken without consent. A handwritten schedule cross-referencing ovulation dates based on medical logs he'd stolen from the infirmary. He denied everything. At first, they wanted it. All of them. That's what no one's saying. They needed attention. They wanted someone to make them feel human. But after being presented with the DNA evidence, the camera override logs, and Officer Pierce's testimony, he cracked. "She wasn't supposed to die," he whispered. "I just needed her quiet." What Marcus didn't realize was that he wasn't alone in guilt. The investigation expanded. It turned out that two other staff members, a medical aide named Tamara Wells and a kitchen supervisor named Eddie Polk, had helped cover up suspicious reports. They altered meal logs, hid drug test results. In exchange, they received hush money and favors, extra time off, promotions, even protection from prior complaints. Danielle Rivers's testimony became critical. She told the agents about Shayla's last words, her fear, the note she passed, and the warning she left behind. When asked why she didn't speak up earlier, Danielle's answer stunned the courtroom weeks later. "Because every woman I've seen try to stand up in this system either disappears or dies." The Florida press dubbed it the Palm Bay pregnancy scandal. But to the women behind bars, it was more than a headline. It was proof that someone finally listened. The state called for emergency reform. Warden Robert McAllister was placed on administrative leave. Several guards were reassigned, and a third-party oversight committee was brought in to audit every single complaint filed in the past 10 years. Monica Hayes stood before the cameras outside the courthouse just days later and spoke with quiet fury. Shayla Banks was not just an inmate. She was not just a number. She was a whistleblower, a victim, a woman who tried to warn us. And we failed her. But now we're listening, and we're coming for the rest of them. Inside the prison, something had shifted. For the first time in years, the women felt seen. Jasmine, Carla, and the others were moved to a separate facility with access to therapy, OBGYNs, and legal counsel. Danielle Rivers left her job at Palm Bay, changed her number, and began working with an advocacy group for incarcerated women. But the most powerful image came a week later, during a vigil outside the prison gates. Former inmates, civil rights leaders, and even some prison staff lit candles for Shayla. And in the center of the memorial stood a cardboard sign, scrawled in black marker. She told the truth. They killed her for it, but she won. The courtroom was packed. On October 16, 2022, nearly 10 weeks after the death of Shayla Banks, Marcus Dawson stood trial in the Circuit Court of Leon County, Florida. Outside, a crowd of protesters held handmade signs with messages like, "Justice for Shayla. We believe the women. Prisons shouldn't be hunting grounds." Inside, the air was heavy. Reporters lined the back rows. The prosecution table stacked with binders, DNA results, surveillance logs, and the most damning evidence of all, Shayla's final letter. Marcus sat silently between his attorneys, dressed in a cheap gray suit that didn't quite fit. He looked smaller now, paler, like the walls were closing in. Because they were. Prosecutor Elena Graves, known for her unflinching cross-examinations, opened with a voice like steel. Asterisk, this case is not about sex. It is not about love. It is about power. Marcus Dawson used his badge and his access to prey on women locked in cages. Women who could not fight back, who could not say no, and who were systematically ignored when they tried to speak up. And when one of them, Miss Shayla Banks, dared to expose him, he silenced her permanently. Asterisk, the defense? They painted a different picture. Lead attorney Derek Manning claimed the relationships were consensual, that Shayla was emotionally unstable, and fabricated the allegations out of spite. But the jury, 6 women, 6 men, wasn't buying it. The prosecution began laying out the case brick by brick. Forensic experts confirmed the presence of Marcus's DNA on Shayla's hidden cloth sample, as well as on the undergarments recovered from his home. Surveillance logs showed targeted camera malfunctions that aligned with his shifts, specifically during nights when pregnancies were believed to have occurred. Chemical testing of food trays from his rounds revealed traces of benzodiazepines, sedatives strong enough to render someone semi-conscious or fully unaware. Then came the video evidence. 2 low-resolution stills recovered from a corrupted drive by federal techs, showed Marcus entering cell block B after hours, alone, carrying a syringe and a folded bedsheet. He had no scheduled check-in that night. Danielle Rivers, the nurse who held Shayla's final note, testified with shaking hands but unwavering resolve. She told me she was going to die. She said if anything happened, to give the log to someone who would care. And when I saw her, the marks on her neck weren't from hanging. They were from hands. Next came Officer Leonard Pierce, who had worked beside Marcus for years. He joked about the girls, said they were lonely, that they needed attention. I should have reported it, but I didn't want trouble. I didn't think he'd kill anyone. But the moment that broke the courtroom came from Jasmine Lee, one of the 5 women who had become pregnant. She stood, 6 months along, hands resting on her belly, and looked Marcus directly in the eye as she spoke. Asterisk, you said no one would believe us, that we were criminals, animals, that our voices didn't matter. But I remember everything now. I remember waking up bleeding. I remember the sound of your belt. I remember thinking I was dying. And now this child inside me, he'll never know you. And thank God for that. Asterisk, several jurors wiped away tears. Even the judge, a normally stern woman in her late 60s, paused to collect herself before calling a recess. It was during day 7 of the trial that Marcus finally broke. Cornered by evidence, isolated from his former allies, and facing life without parole, he took the stand. At first, he blamed prison culture, said it was lonely work, that the women came on to him. But when the prosecution played Shayla's voice, her final letter, read aloud by Monica Hayes, his expression changed. He looked down and whispered, "She wasn't supposed to die." A silence fell across the room. I just wanted her quiet. That's all. She was going to ruin everything. The room didn't erupt. No gasps, no shouting, just a slow, cold realization that everyone now saw the man for what he truly was. A predator, a murderer, and a coward who tried to bury the truth with the woman who dared speak it. It took the jury 3 hours. They returned with a unanimous verdict. Guilty on all counts. 5 counts of sexual battery of an incapacitated person. 2 counts of conspiracy to obstruct justice. 1 count of second-degree murder, Shayla Banks. Multiple counts of misconduct in a correctional facility. Marcus Dawson was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His final words to the judge, "I hope someday they forgive me, but I don't expect them to." No one in the gallery replied. Outside the courthouse, Monica Hayes held a press conference. Her voice cracked as she spoke. Asterisk, we can never bring Shayla back, but we can carry her voice forward. And today, her voice won. Asterisk, the trial was over. The cameras faded. The headlines moved on. But inside the walls of Palm Bay and across the entire Florida Department of Corrections, nothing would ever be the same again. The verdict against Marcus Dawson sent shockwaves through the state's prison system. Not because it was unexpected, but because it proved that someone in uniform could actually be held accountable. And it all began with a young woman most people had never heard of until she died, Shayla Banks. Within a month of the sentencing, Florida's State Attorney General launched a statewide audit of every women's correctional facility. What they found was disturbing. Over 120 complaints of sexual misconduct in the past 5 years. Only 4 had resulted in disciplinary action. Multiple facilities with non-functioning cameras, outdated reporting systems, and untrained medical staff. A pattern of retaliation against inmates who filed reports, including isolation, loss of visitation rights, and reclassification. Public pressure mounted. The scandal reached national news. Advocacy groups demanded sweeping changes. And in January 2023, Florida passed what became known as Shayla's Law. The new legislation required 24/7 operational cameras in all high-risk units, mandatory DNA preservation in cases of alleged abuse, third-party oversight boards to review complaints from female inmates, whistleblower protection for prison staff and inmates alike. Shayla had never seen the law named after her, but her story had changed it all. Of the 5 women who had been impregnated during the abuse, 3 chose to terminate their pregnancies once they were given the choice outside of Marcus's control. 2 others, Jasmine Lee and Carla Denton, carried their pregnancies to term. Jasmine gave birth to a boy in May 2023. She named him Noah Elijah. Elijah, after the prophet, she said in an interview, because I want him to be a voice for the voiceless. Like Shayla, Jasmine was later granted early release under a clemency order and now works with a nonprofit that supports children born to incarcerated mothers. Carla was transferred to a women's rehabilitation center and reunited with her older daughter after serving 7 years of a 12-year sentence. She told reporters she still had nightmares, but she was healing. Danielle left her nursing job shortly after the trial. She received both praise and threats. Her license was audited twice. Her tires were slashed in her driveway, but she never backed down. Today, Danielle speaks at conferences on prison ethics and teaches trauma-informed care to new nurses working in correctional facilities. She still keeps Shayla's logbook in a locked drawer at home. Sometimes I open it, she said. Not to read, just to remember how much courage looks like. Warden Robert McAllister was never criminally charged, but the state removed him quietly 6 months after the trial and offered no public explanation. In his exit interview, leaked anonymously to the press, he said, "There are things you don't see when you don't want to." The quote appeared in a New York Times editorial titled, "The Eyes That Chose Not to See, a Funeral They Tried to Ignore." Shayla Banks had no family able to claim her remains. Her mother had passed years ago. Her younger brother was in rehab in Tampa. For weeks, her body remained in the county morgue, unclaimed, until Monica Hayes stepped in. She petitioned the court to act as legal custodian, organized a memorial service, and invited former inmates, activists, and anyone who'd ever been failed by a system that silenced women. On a rainy Saturday morning, over 200 people gathered in a small Miami church to say goodbye to the girl no one believed, until they did. In place of a traditional headstone, a bronze plaque was placed at the cemetery entrance. It reads, S. Banks, 1995 to 2022. She died behind bars, but her voice broke down the walls. Other states took notice. California, New York, Illinois, Maryland, each launched their own reviews of correctional facilities for women. Civil rights groups began collecting stories, patterns, data. A movement formed, and Shayla Banks became its symbol, not because she was perfect or innocent or even finished telling her story, but because she tried. Because she refused to be silent in a place designed to bury silence. In a 60-minute segment aired in late 2023, a former Palm Bay inmate was asked, "What do you think Shayla would have done if she had made it out?" She didn't hesitate. Asterisk, she'd be on the front lines, holding a megaphone and making sure the next girl didn't have to die to be heard. Asterisk, in most stories about prison, the people behind bars are forgotten. They become numbers, files, cases to process and lock away. Their names fade. Their voices dissolve into steel and silence. But every once in a while, someone speaks so clearly, so bravely, that even concrete can't hold back the echo. Shayla Banks was one of those voices. And though she never made it out of Palm Bay alive, her story did. In the months that followed Marcus Dawson's conviction, more women came forward. Not all of them had been part of the original investigation. Some had remained silent during the trial out of fear, shame, or the sheer disbelief that anyone would listen. But once Shayla's story became public, and the system was finally forced to acknowledge it, the dam broke. One of them was Maria Velasquez, a 43-year-old undocumented woman who had served 6 years for a nonviolent drug offense. She quietly confessed to her counselor that Marcus had visited her cell repeatedly during night shifts. She never spoke up because she feared deportation. But with legal support from Monica Hayes' team, Maria was transferred to a safer facility and granted legal protection under a new whistleblower asylum clause. Another was Tina Holloway, a former Palm Bay inmate who had been paroled 2 years before the scandal. She saw the headlines on TV in a halfway house in Tallahassee and burst into tears. Tina had filed a report back in 2020 about being touched during a supposed medical escort, but the paperwork had vanished. Now, with renewed attention on old complaints, her case was reopened, and this time someone listened. Then there was Ronnie Jackson, a transgender woman who had spent time in administrative segregation. She wrote a letter from solitary confinement in another prison, recounting eerie similarities, missing time, headaches, foggy memories during Marcus's past rotations. She had never told a soul before. Now her letter was entered into federal records. Each story added another thread to the tapestry of truth Shayla had begun to unravel. And for every voice that rose, the system that tried to bury them sank deeper into scrutiny. Advocacy groups reported a 300% increase in hotline calls from incarcerated women across the state. Florida's newly formed Prison Oversight Commission added 4 new case investigators just to handle the overflow of complaints. One commissioner was quoted saying, "It's like the floodgates opened. We thought Shayla's case was rare. Now we know better." Some of the women who spoke up were relocated. Others were finally released. A few, still serving time, began organizing from within, starting book clubs, prayer circles, and even trauma healing groups named after Shayla. The message was clear. She didn't die for nothing. Today, if you walk into certain wings of women's prisons across Florida, you'll notice things are different. There are cameras where there once were none. There are signs posted in multiple languages outlining prisoners' rights. There are new buttons installed in high-risk units. Panic buttons linked to outside agencies, not just internal staff. And there are names etched into training manuals and case studies. One of those names is hers. If something happens to me, this wasn't an accident. Those 13 words, scribbled in a desperate moment on a piece of paper smuggled out in legal mail, brought down a predator, exposed a culture of silence, and sparked a movement. Shayla didn't have a law degree. She wasn't rich. She didn't come from power or privilege. She was just a young woman with a sharp mind, a quiet strength, and a story she refused to let die with her. She was the kind of person the system is designed to ignore. And yet, she became the reason it had to listen. 6 months after the trial ended, Monica Hayes received a handwritten letter in her office mail. It had no return address, but the postmark was from a county jail in rural Georgia. The handwriting was shaky, the grammar imperfect, but the words stopped her cold. "Dear Ms. Hayes, I don't know if this will reach you. They say you helped the girl from Florida, the one they called Shayla. I never met her. I came in after it all happened. But the women here still talk about her. They say she wrote everything down, that she had fire in her heart. I've been afraid to speak for years. Thought it wouldn't matter. Thought my voice didn't count. But then I read about her in a magazine someone left in the day room. I read how she didn't back down even when she knew they might kill her. I ain't as smart as her. I don't have no lawyer. But I got a notebook now. And I'm writing. I'm writing everything. Just like she did. I guess I just wanted to say thank you for believing her. Because of that, maybe someone might believe me too. Jay." Monica read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and placed it inside Shayla's original file. No fanfare, no headlines, just a quiet promise that the story hadn't ended, and that somewhere in another prison, in another forgotten place, another voice was starting to rise. Her death didn't just reveal one bad guard. It revealed a system that looked away. A system where surveillance cameras conveniently failed, where complaints went missing, where nurses were threatened into silence, where pregnancy could appear in a place supposedly sealed off from men, and no one asked why. But Shayla did. And that simple act, asking why, became revolutionary. The ripple effects of her story are still being felt. In early 2024, the Department of Justice announced a national review of all female correctional facilities. New York passed its own version of Shayla's Law. California launched a task force for prison accountability. Nonprofit organizations saw a spike in funding and support. Hotline calls from incarcerated women tripled. And perhaps most remarkably, a federal pilot program was launched designed by formerly incarcerated women to bring trauma-informed care and oversight into prisons, starting with the very facility where Shayla died. Her brother, Jordan Banks, now in recovery and training to become a substance abuse counselor, visited her grave for the first time on what would have been her 28th birthday. He placed a single sunflower beside her plaque and whispered, "You didn't die for nothing, Shay. You finally made them listen." In the world of true crime, stories often end in tragedy. The killer is caught. The trial ends. The news moves on. But not this one. Because this time, the victim left behind something more powerful than grief or fear. She left behind a warning, and a blueprint, and a name no one would forget. If you listen closely today, beneath the noise of the headlines and the weight of the court documents, you'll still hear her voice in every reform, every bill passed, every woman who steps forward and says, "I believe her. I am her. And I won't be silent either." She died behind bars, but her voice broke through, and it shook the walls of a system that thought it would never be held accountable.